Hello, Nashville. I am Beau Beach. This is the newly rebranded What You Need to Know podcast, formerly called Free Speech with Beau Beach podcast. We've rebranded in an effort to make it clear the value that we are offering to you, the community, but also to our clients, right? So the concept of the podcast going forward is taking 2 weeks of Nashville commercial real estate news, taking out all of the major stories and everything you need to know, and then presenting that to you in 1 hour or less. So you're condensing 2 weeks of Nashville commercial real estate news, a very, very busy market that's hard to stay up to date on. And we're going to bring you 1 hour of engaging content that we hope you find informative, perhaps entertaining, but it's certainly going to add a level of expertise above and beyond what you can expect just reading these articles in the local and national publications in which they originally appear. So 2 weeks of commercial real estate news boiled down into one entertaining hour. That's what you can expect going forward from the What You Need to Know podcast. So let's get into it. We're going to start with the first story. Nashville ranked number 6 market in the country for overall real estate prospects, according to a new study by the Urban Land Institute. So this is a well-known study. This is something that comes out every year. It's ranking or attempting to rank the markets in the country that are most poised for appreciation, right? So those markets that are best to buy into. Historically, Nashville has been near the top of the list. We fell to number 6 this year. After a 3-year reign in the number 1 spot, Music City dropped to 5th last year and saw another slight fall on the charts this year. So the top spot for 3 straight years, then 5th, and now 6th. Dallas Fort Worth took the top spot for the 2nd year in a row. Jersey City somehow ranked 2nd, followed by Miami, Brooklyn, and Houston, respectively. Following Nashville, Northern New Jersey ranked number 7, with Tampa, St. Pete, Manhattan, and Phoenix rounding out the top 10. Last year, cities in Florida and Texas were the only ones to beat out Nashville. Quote, "The future of Nashville remains bright. Our job market continues to be strong, particularly in technology, healthcare, and finance, attracting major employers like Amazon and Oracle, and the resulting investment from those companies into Nashville." The study, compiled from interviews and surveys of over 2,000 market participants. So I do think this is a useful study, a useful ranking, and I do look forward to it coming out every year. A lot of surprises this year. Among all the regions, the Southeast has the largest number of markets in the top 20 ratings of overall real estate prospects. Sentiment is improving across the country, but the report finds that many commercial real estate professionals are still proceeding with caution in the current economic environment. Quote, "In this cycle, real estate continues to offer development and investment opportunities, but requires navigating through the fog." So I would tell you, from what I see on the ground, we are in a market that is very strong for some assets and very, very weak for others. And I think the big determining factor of what is in demand and what isn't is how easy it is to go out and borrow money to buy those assets, right? So in my opinion, our biggest challenge is still the availability of financing, not necessarily the cost, but just having banks that are unwilling to lend buyers money to acquire those commercial properties. You know, the other thing that I take away from this is just some of these cities that are located in blue states, right? For the longest time, the blue states were unrepresented in this list. We've got New Jersey involved now. We've got New York involved now, and that's it. So you got New Jersey and New York that are making the list that haven't been on that list for quite a while. The blue states have been very, very down, but seemingly are making a comeback. Dallas, Fort Worth, the top market in the country for the second year in a row. All right, let's keep moving. A 12 South site sells for $6 million and is now eyed for redevelopment. One of 12 South's more unusual buildings at 2907 12th Avenue South. Nashville-based development company Cornerstone Partnership is the developer here. The seller was a trust affiliated with Nashville Cypress family, which paid a whopping $106,000 for the building and the 0.26 acres on which it sits back in 1998. The family had the building previously used for residential units renovated in 1999. $106,000 in 1998 to $6 million in 2026. In 2024, the property was rezoned to a specific plan so as to better allow for the redevelopment of the site with a replacement building. So before this property traded, the seller, in unison with the buyer, most likely during the due diligence period, went through the process of having it rezoned to a specific plan. That's what happens in Nashville most often these days. A lot of people think when you're talking about rezoning, right, from perhaps a commercial use to an industrial use, let's say. A lot of people think you're going out and requesting that the zoning code for that property be changed. And that's really not how most of these rezonings go. When these properties do get rezoned, they're getting rezoned to a specific plan, meaning you are going to lay out in great detail how you would like to use this property. And they are going to approve your specific plan for using that property, not necessarily just giving you a new zoning code for which you to define how you want to use it, right? So if you're going to get a property rezoned in Nashville, just understand you're going to need to do so most likely with a specific plan, which is a much more involved process. You're going to have to spend some money on the front end on architecturals, maybe surveying, maybe some engineering. It's going to take some money to be able to prepare the package that you're going to need to put in front of Metro to request that rezoning. Corner Partnership, which developed the Gulch property on which sits a W Hotel, is not new to 12 South. The company owns the building housing high-end athletic clothing retailer Beau and an adjacent structure leased by fashion retailers Madewell, Marine Layer, and Stony Clover Lane. You know, that's what 12 South is really known for, those first-to-the-market retailers. Recognized for its exterior metal panels and tropical color scheme, the modernist Cypress building accommodates Marathon Pilates, Marathon Fitness, and Element Salon. So, a very unusual looking building on 12 South that sold for $106,000 in 1998. Just traded for $6 million, not for the building that sits there today. In fact, that building has a negative value, meaning it's going to cost money to demolish it. They paid $6 million for the dirt, along with the specific plan rezoning that was approved and accompanies the dirt. So, you know, the prices being paid in 12 South are truly eye-popping. And I'm told that all of these first-to-market, not all of these, but many of these first-to-market retailers that, for whatever reason, have decided that 12 South is the ideal location for them, some of those retailers are paying over $100 per square foot to be there, which is crazy. I was just in Lexington, Kentucky this past week for Thanksgiving. And I was talking to my brother-in-law who's a commercial broker there. I said, you know, what are you getting for all of this retail in Lexington, right? Lexington is crazy, the amount of retail they have there. They have a crazy amount of retail and a crazy amount of apartments. They are just absolutely saturated with both. And he told me they're getting $25 to $32 a square foot for most of the retail. You know, compare that to $100 per square foot for a store in 12 South. We are talking about crazy, crazy rents being paid to be in 12 South, which makes paying $6 million for the dirt on which to build a property a reasonable number. So 12 South, it's just not for me. I have no interest in going to these first to market retailers, but people are going. I don't know who's going. Somebody's going. Somebody's paying money to make all of these numbers work. Now let's talk about the Fifth Third project, right? Fifth Third Center project, rather. This is one of the more high-profile office buildings in all of downtown Nashville that recently traded at a low price, with the buyer expecting to convert a portion of it to a high-rise hotel. They just were issued a permit valued at $1 million. And what do you get for that $1 million? Interior demolition. That's one of those things that has always kind of caught me off guard, is the cost of demolition. I never really understood why it had to cost so much, but nevertheless, imagine stroking a check for $1 million and all you're getting is some walls ripped out, right? The issuing of the permit comes 3 months after the skyscraper sold for $55 million, $90 million less than the figure for which it changed hands 6 years ago. So this is a property that lost $90 million in value in just 6 years. The new owner of the Class A tower is a New York LLC affiliated with Pivot Real Estate Partners. The seller of the high-rise was a global private equity firm known as the Blackstone Group. The high-rise is being eyed for conversion to a hotel with nearly 500 rooms. Opened in 1986 and offering nearly 650,000 square feet of leasable space, the 31-story tower offers a post-modern exterior design. Quote, Fifth Third Center is an iconic property and uniquely designed building in the center of Nashville. This is a rare opportunity to own a preeminent property at a basis well below replacement cost. So that's what the current owner is saying, right? They got into a very well located property at a basis very well below its replacement cost, which is why they're willing to spend $1 million for some interior demolition before you really spend the big money replacing all of those floors with office with high-end hotel rooms. So that's an update on that project. Let's talk about Jelly Roll and his downtown bar, right? So make this clear, Jelly Roll doesn't own the bar. Jelly Roll doesn't own the building. Jelly Roll licenses likeness and identity to the tenant. So the bar signs a long-term lease to occupy the space. They've got to deal with Jelly Roll to use his name. Jelly Roll gets a percentage off the top of every sale made in the bar, right? So Jelly Roll isn't personally involved here. Jelly Roll's Goodnight Nashville is for sale at an undisclosed price, but the broker working that deal is giving pricing guidance for the 5-story structure of $100 million. Franklin-based Alpha Development owns the property, having paid $20 million for the dirt in 2021. It had a previous building housing retailer Trail West Boots, which they demolished, and then teamed with Phoenix-based Evening Entertainment Group to redevelop the 0.14 acre site with Jelly Roll's Goodnight Nashville, which opened just earlier this year at the address of 209 Broadway. Lower Broadway commercial buildings can command more than $3,000 per square foot. Folks in other markets are going to be absolutely shocked by that number. For example, the 405 Broadway building, housing a John Bon Jovi theme bar, restaurant, and live music venue, recently listed for sale for even more, $130 million, the equivalent of more than $3,500 per square foot. Can you imagine paying $3,500 per square foot to buy a property fully occupied by a John Bon Jovi theme bar? I have never understood What is so special about John Bon Jovi? You know, I've never intentionally listened to John Bon Jovi in my entire life. Maybe it's like a women thing. You know, maybe women are into John Bon Jovi because he doesn't look like a real masculine man to me. He looks like a very feminine man. So I don't understand who's really feeling John Bon Jovi. You know, maybe that's the move. Maybe that his bar is full of women, and that's why men go there. Not for him, but for the women that are into him. I don't know. I'm just speaking out loud on that one. Let's keep moving. A downtown office building sold at a foreclosure auction. The 501 Union Street office building was bought by the site's lender for $7 million at the foreclosure auction. The auction was held on November 21st outside the main south entrance of the Davidson County Metropolitan Courthouse. Can you believe this? This is, to this day, how properties are sold in a foreclosure auction, literally on the courthouse steps. You've heard that expression before. They're literally selling $7 million assets via an auction, standing outside the courthouse on the courthouse steps. Why they do that, I have no idea. Why are we outside? Why are we on the steps? Yeah, tradition, perhaps. But I think a lot of people would be surprised to know we're literally auctioning multi-million-dollar buildings outside on the steps. Okay? Maryland-based Beltway Capital Management purchased the land through a credit bid, which allows a lender to bid the amount they are owed on a property, right? Chicago-based Level Office was the previous owner of the building. The co-working and office rental company paid $8.85 million for the Union Street office building in 2017. At that time, Little Rock-based Bank OZK, one of the most aggressive banks fueling Nashville's construction boom, loaned $10 million towards the purchase. Bank OZK transferred its rights to the property to Beltway Capital Management in 2023 via an assignment deed of trust. So Bank OZK knew there was a lot of distress here. They wanted to get these distressed loans off of their book. So they sold it to to Maryland-based Beltway Capital Management. We don't know exactly what they paid, right? But the amount that they are owed was $7 million, right? So they're owed $7 million, so that's what they bid. There were no other bidders higher than $7 million. So the lender who bought that note from Bank OZK is now the owner of a pretty nice little office building, fully built out to be used as a co-working center, a very expensive type of build out. This property located across the street from the arcade. The building has been updated in recent years and offers around 87,000 square feet of co-working space, which is a crazy amount of co-working space. You know, the co-working business is one of those businesses that really had a boom, being led by WeWork, who ultimately went bankrupt as well. It is just it's a difficult business to be in, right? If you've been listening to it for any period of time, I was the owner of two different co-working spaces years ago, both of which I sold. But during that process, I realized how difficult of a business that is, right? There's very limited upside because you're really just earning the spread, right? The spread is how much total rent you can collect from tenants, and your costs are what it costs to actually lease that space and provide all those services. So you're making a spread between what you charge and what it costs you. And depending on where your occupancy is, it's hard to make those numbers work. The upside is very limited. So I assume that's why Level Office went out of business here, even though they had 87,000 square feet that's well located, that is already nicely built out for co-working space. They still couldn't make it. The demand just wasn't there. The numbers didn't work. So that foreclosure auction completed on the courthouse steps, and the lender, now the owner of 501 Union Street. Let's keep moving. Red Bicycle Coffee evicted from its Murfreesboro location. Many folks have heard of Red Bicycle. I actually have a Red Bicycle near my home in Franklin that my children bicycle to. So this one got my attention. A judge said that Red Bicycle could operate in the space through 2025 if the restaurant paid its current and past due rent obligations before October 24th. As of November 18th, rent was unpaid for August, September, October, and November, which led to the judge granting the formal eviction. Quote, my client provided Red Bicycle with every opportunity to remain in business on the square. However, when rent stopped being habitually late and just stopped coming, my client had to move forward to protect its rights. It's unfortunate it came to an eviction today. So they were paying rent late, but they were paying, and then they just stopped paying, at which point the landlord exercised its right of eviction. Red Bicycle locations have different licensee owners. Red Bicycle on the Square LLC is registered to a Marcus Leonard. Red Bicycle, originally founded in North Carolina, is known for its sweet and savory crepes and a full coffee menu. The Germantown location shuttered in September after 14 years in business. Red Bicycle operates 8 locations in the Nashville area. So this is similar to a franchise agreement, right? Instead of being a franchisee, they are licensees. Nevertheless, same idea. You've got this Red Bicycle brand that's actually operated by different licensees, which is tough. If you're a licensee that's really doing a good job, has really done a good job creating awareness for the brand, you are kind of going to be pulled down in terms of brand awareness because of a licensee in Murfreesboro that stopped paying rent. No fault of your own, but because you license someone else's brand, you've kind of got to take it. You know, that's the challenge with licenses, that's the challenge with franchises. So much of the outcome of your business is outside of your control. You've got only certain aspects of the business that you can control, and many other aspects of that business are controlled by others. You know, I briefly was in a franchise business, and I knew I wasn't going to like it going in, but I didn't trust my instincts. I didn't risk a whole lot of money to get into it, but I did get into a franchise. And the whole time I was in that business, I was just uncomfortable with the lack of control. You know, I am a control freak, I suppose. You know, if I see something that I don't like, I'm going to try to fix it. I don't want to ask anybody else permission, right? But that's absolutely what you have to do when you license someone else's brand or you agree to be a franchisee. You know, perhaps those opportunities are good for folks that don't have a lot of business experience. You know, perhaps if the brand that you're licensing or becoming a franchise owner of is so strong that the only way you can really compete in that space is to pay for access to that brand, maybe that makes sense. But if the brand is kind of obscure to your market, I don't see any reason why a real business person, a real entrepreneur, would ever allow themselves to be involved in a licensee agreement or a franchise agreement. It's just not worth it. It's not worth the cost or the lack of control. You know, they want to review your books, they want to review your financial statements, they want to see all the in and outs of your business, and you know they're really taking their money off the top, right? They're usually getting paid a percentage of revenue, right? But still they want to have their nose in your business, and you know, I would advise you against becoming involved in any type of those relationships if you are a true entrepreneur at heart. It did not end well for me. I exited that business fairly rapidly and was very thankful to do so. I will never be involved in a franchise ever again in my life. Let's keep moving. Several Second Avenue buildings still have to be demolished. 5 years later, 5 years after the bombing that damaged many of the facades on 2nd Avenue North, are still not demolished. That is so crazy to me. Those buildings, the owners of those buildings had millions of dollars tied up in those buildings. And for 5 straight years, those damaged buildings have just sat there. No cash flow whatsoever, no progress whatsoever, just sitting. It's hard for me to understand how that's even possible. The buildings at addresses 170 through 174 2nd Avenue North, as well as 176 2nd Avenue North, are now set to be demolished. 166 2nd Avenue North previously housed the Rodizio Grill, is now undergoing a renovation on the front facade. The 4 buildings slated to be razed were listed for sale in November 2023, but did not sell. At the time of the bombing, the now set to be demolished buildings housed Pride and Glory Tattoo Parlor and Simply the Best $10 Boutique. At 184 2nd Avenue North, which previously housed Hooters, that building is also being renovated. So you got buildings being renovated, you've got facades being repaired, and you've got buildings beginning to be demolished 5 years after the damage was caused. That is an absolute nightmare scenario. If you have millions of dollars tied up in these properties, and for 5 years you've been losing money, and 5 years later you're still trying to figure it out, absolute nightmare scenario for a lot of those property owners. The slow pace at which they put that 2nd Avenue back together is got to be infuriating for those folks. All the streetscape work that they did in 3 different sections, that's all wrapping up now. So the government got their part done before a lot of these private owners did, which is just crazy to me. Boring Company's second tunnel would run under Broadway to West End. The Boring Company is in advanced planning. The Broadway effort comes as executives work daily to finalize approvals, licenses, and leases necessary to begin their first announced tunnel in Nashville. That is the 19-mile circuit named Music City Loop, which will span from the site near the state capitol to the Nashville International Airport. Boring employed drivers in Teslas would operate a rideshare service between the 2 points with an unknown number of stops en route. Both would use underground right-of-way underneath state-owned roads, which is interesting, right? So all of the Boring Company's approvals, licenses, leases, it's all coming from the state. It's not coming from Metro, who would have been a nightmare to deal with, right? The state is easier to deal with than Metro, so they're putting all of their tunnels under state-owned roads so they are not having to go through Metro, which means the State Department of Transportation, not Metro, would oversee permitting and regulation of the tunnel's construction and operations. It was not immediately clear where the proposed Broadway tunnel might start or end. It would be Metro's responsibility, however, including the fire department, which responds to every emergency call, to respond to potential safety incidents in the tunnel. So the only thing that Metro has to do with any of the Boring Company's 2 tunnels is going to be the fire department responding to emergencies. So they still may use that fire department stuff as leverage to be a pain in the neck for the Boring Company. But for the most part, the state of Tennessee and its Republican leadership have been all over Boring Company, wanting those tunnels, doing everything they possibly can to fast track the process. And it's going to pay off greatly for Nashville. It's going to be a very, very cool project. Metro and TPAC reach an agreement on its East Bank relocation. So you've heard about this for a long time. Everything that's going on in the East Bank is taking forever. It's a slow moving process. No one's even trying to sell us on the idea that it's going to pick up steam. It's just all going to be very, very slow. But at least one point of contention, which was where is TPAC going, seems to have been sorted out. They will be locating themselves at the foot of the pedestrian bridge, right? So the walking bridge over the river to the east bank at the foot of the bridge is where TPAC is going to eventually sit. The agreement will see TPAC allow Metro to use the facility 30 days annually for educational opportunities and other programming. So as part of this deal, Metro gets free use of the facility 30 days per year. The state of Tennessee has granted $500 million towards the future TPAC facility, contingent upon TPAC raising 20% of matching funds from the private sector and Metro Nashville participating in the project based on the Metro-owned East Bank site. TPAC would lease the land for Metro for $100 per year. So Metro owns the land on which TPAC will sit. They are going to lease it to TPAC for $100 per year, with all of the big cash coming from the state to the tune of $500 million to build a state-of-the-art performing arts facility that desperately needs redone. You know, TPAC, anyone that's been to TPAC that knows anything about the performing arts knows that it is not up to Nashville standards. Nashville has to do better, especially in a town known for its performing arts. And it's finally going to happen on the East Bank at a very, very cool spot with $500 million coming from the state. Now next, real quick, Paramount, a huge tower planned for downtown Nashville, is now marketing itself as an opportunity for second home lodging, right? So this is a full page ad from the Business Journal. And what strikes me about this is how they are targeting second home users in the heart of downtown Nashville. So these are going to be very expensive apartments, condos that are going to, they think, appeal to out-of-town folks that just want to have a weekend getaway in the heart of downtown Nashville. I thought that was interesting enough to present. It is not every day that a downtown is really pitching itself as a second home opportunity. You know, here in Tennessee, when we think about second homes, we're thinking about lake homes. We're thinking about homes perhaps in the mountains out east. We're thinking about perhaps a beach house down in 30A. And this developer is now trying to get folks to think about, hey, how about a condo in the city as your second home? You don't need the beach. You don't need the mountains. You just need the energy of downtown Nashville. And here's an opportunity to put yourself in a brand new condo that you can enjoy on the weekends. So it'll be interesting to see how that plays out. You know, it personally does, the idea doesn't personally appeal to me, but I like it. I mean, I like it very much. If there are folks out there that really think that makes sense for them and their lifestyle, you know, those are probably folks that don't have children, right? Maybe the children have left the home and you know, they have that suburban life, but desire to have maybe a little bit more going on, be in the center of the action. I can see how you'd want to have a little bit of that city life. But nevertheless, you know, you don't see that very often. So we'll see how that plays out for Paramount, offering itself up as an opportunity for second homeowners. Let's keep moving. We've got a few left here. We'll keep them short and sweet. If you've heard of Sweet Green, right? It is a pretty popular Los Angeles-based restaurant. I was actually just in Indianapolis at you know, what would be the equivalent of their Green Hills Mall, and Sweet Green had a very prominent location within that mall. The Los Angeles-based restaurant will now open in the Gulch at 341 11th Avenue South. The space was last home to an Atlanta-based Upbeat, which opened in the spring of 2024. Sweetgreen was founded in 2007 in Washington, D.C.'s Georgetown neighborhood, just months after graduating from college, looking for a healthier way to eat. In 2016, Sweetgreen moved to its headquarters in Los Angeles and now has over 250 locations across 20 states. The health-conscious, fast casual restaurant offers signature bowls and salads like the Fish Taco Bowl or the Super Green Goddess Salad, or guests can build their own. This is the first Sweetgreen location in Tennessee. So they're already in 20 states and they're finally getting to Tennessee. So this is kind of hoity-toity salad, fast casual. I didn't eat there. I would have loved to eat there. I was with my daughter for a National League soccer game, and anybody that's out there knows when you're traveling for sports with your children, what mom and dad want to do don't matter at all, right? So whether I want to eat at Sweetgreen or not, I'm just chasing her around trying to get her to where she needs to be. Otherwise, I would have been happy to taste test that Sweetgreen and report back. I just ran out of time before I could get it done. Real quickly, supposedly the Trump organization is now eyeing a Nashville hotel. No location for the potential hotel project was included in business filings, and the Trump organization has not made an announcement about a Nashville project. The Trump organization lists 11 hotels on its website. If Nashville project were to materialize, it would be the first U.S. real estate licensing deal for Trump since 2017. So they basically have some new business entities created in Tennessee, which are giving the impression that Trump perhaps is pursuing a new hotel licensing agreement here. We'll see. There isn't a whole lot to sink our teeth into there. I guess the story is, after being on the sidelines for almost 9 years, right? They haven't done a deal since 2017. They may be getting back in the business of licensing their name to be used on others' hotels. That's the business the Trump organization is now in. And they may be doing that in Nashville, which I think would be awesome, but is way too early to tell. We've got two more stories for you. Bargatze isn't joking about a Nashville theme park, right? I would argue that Nashville absolutely needs more family-friendly entertainment, right? We've got a lot of adult entertainment. We've got plenty of places to go and get drunk and act crazy. What we don't have is a lot of family-friendly activities. A theme park, I think, would fill that need. I think it's going to be very, very difficult to get done. Nashville native Nate Bargatze and California-based design firm Storyland Studios are in the early stages of development for Nateland, a good, clean, family-friendly entertainment environment. A feasibility study for the 100-plus acre theme park and potential hotel will be complete in the first quarter of next year, and Bargatze and Storyland are focused on attracting investors. Nateland Experiences, an arm of Bargatze's Nateland company, and Storyland Studios will develop the park. So, first of all, you got to find 100 acres. Not easy to do. Even if you do find the 100 acres, the cost of that 100 acres is going to be extreme. And then you've got to finance not only the purchase of the land, but you've got to finance the construction of a theme park. We're talking real money here, big money. Quote, our goal is to create a truly premium themed entertainment experience right in Music City that reflects the unique humor and heart of Nateland, while also delivering a world-class destination for families. The Nateland Experiences division of Nateland and the Storyland design team are reviewing potential theme park sites in the greater Nashville area working with state and local officials. UC Universal Studios, I kind of would like that to be Nateland. We can have rides and start making movies here. I think I know what is missing in entertainment, and I think this would work. So that's what Bargatze is saying. He wants to create something similar to Universal Studios that could be a theme park but also be a functioning movie studio. The 46-year-old comedian is known for his clean stand-up and is the #1 earning comedian worldwide. How in the world he is the #1 earning comedian worldwide, I do not know. I actually do not believe it. I think that is nonsense. But he does seem like a cool dude, and he is very, very pro Nashville. Got a lot of Nashville pride, Tennessee pride. You know, he's a clean comic, which makes sense for the family-friendly entertainment. And, you know, I think the concept is a good one. You know, Universal Studios Nashville with a theme park and an actual operating movie studio, which I don't think Universal Studios Orlando has an operating movie studio where they're actually making film. Maybe they are. I don't think that's true. So I think the concept is very cool. You know, the idea of calling it Nateland is lame as can be. But nevertheless, if they could pull this off, somehow find 100 acres, somehow get all the money to make that happen, that would be a big deal for Nashville. So I am absolutely rooting for them. And lastly, Nashville sees 78 people move to the region daily. And I emphasize region because I do think most people, when they see, oh, all these people are moving to town, they're assuming they're moving to Davidson County, Nashville. And it turns out there are many more people moving to the surrounding counties and suburbs than there are actually moving to Nashville. So let's break that down a little bit. To date, the city has added close to 30,000 jobs this year, signaling that employment growth is continuing to grow just at a slower rate. To put it in perspective for you, in 2024, we added 34,000 jobs, and in 2023, we added 44,000 jobs. So this year, we expect to add 30,000 jobs. So obviously, jobs are what attracts folks to relocate, right? They've got to have a place to work. So the more jobs we add in Nashville, the more people we can expect to move to Nashville, right? Currently, there are 44,700 job postings compared to just 35,000 unemployed. So we actually have more job postings in Nashville than we do total unemployed folks. When it comes to population growth, Nashville added more than 36,000 new residences, a 1.7% increase, with a majority of that coming from migration rather than having babies, right? Over 28,000 people moved to the greater Nashville in the past year, and over 10,000 people moved into Davidson County. So these are kind of conflicting numbers. In one sense, they say Nashville added more than 36,000 new residences. And then the next sentence, they say over 28,000 people moved to greater Nashville in the past year, with only 10,000 people moving into Davidson County. So I don't know exactly why those numbers aren't lining up. But the idea is, based on the 28,000 people moving to the metro area, 78 people per day were moving to our region, right? Of those 28,000 people, only 10,000 people are actually in Davidson County. So almost twice as many people moving to Middle Tennessee, but not living in Davidson County, than those folks actually moving in Nashville proper. 78 people per day. Of course, it was a well-known thing for many years that over 100 people per day were moving to Nashville, and that was what was fueling the boom here, right? So we're down to 78 people per day, most living outside of Nashville, but much of that still being driven by the increase in jobs in the area. So Nashville is in a very, very desirable place relative to other competing metro areas. We are doing very, very well. We have not experienced any of the challenges that other metro areas have over the last 5 years. We've kind of just been chugging along. Obviously we've had some years that were better than others where we set new highs, and we've had a hard time getting back to some of those highs, especially for those well-located industrial sites, where those well-located new development sites, where a real premium was being paid for those sites for a number of years. We're having a hard time getting back to that pricing. But generally speaking, if we zoom out a little bit, Nashville has an extreme amount of momentum. There are very few markets in the country that can compete with us in any way, one being Dallas-Fort Worth. Even Austin, Texas has fallen off. So we don't have a whole lot of direct competition. We've got the wind in our sails, and I do think the future is bright. If we could get to a place where we've got some more consumer confidence, if we could get to a place where prices start ticking down or stop growing as rapidly, if we could get to a place where we've got lower interest rates and an easier way to borrow money, I think the golden age is upon us in Nashville. It's not going to be perfect, but it's absolutely going to be better than most comparably sized cities in our country. So we have a lot to be thankful for. Having just gotten through Thanksgiving, we've got a lot to be thankful for. And I think that's the type of energy we need to bring into the holiday season. Thank you all so much for tuning in to our first ever episode of What You Need to Know podcast, where we're going to bring you 2 weeks of Nashville commercial real estate news, presented in an hour or less in an informative, entertaining way. Thank you so much. As always, we are brought to you by Beechwood Commercial Real Estate Brokerage, your broker if you are a seller of commercial real estate in Nashville or the Southeast. Thanks so much. We'll talk to you soon.